Well, hey guys, welcome back. So as you saw, hey guys, welcome to the channel. So as you saw in the thumbnail, we are building a 9-inch for my 1967 GTO. So let me just flip the camera. Let's just jump into what all we got here and what I'm going to be doing to build this thing. What are some of the subtle differences between the two axles? Well, there's huge differences between the two axles, but within the length. Anyway, let's flip the camera and let's jump into what I've got going on and just start digging into this thing. All right, guys, so here's the axle out of my 67 GTO. It's actually a 67 Buick Skylark axle because my frame was bad and the rolling frame that I got came with a 67 Skylark rear axle. So from outer flange to outer flange, it is 60 7/8 of an inch. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut off, this bracket, which is actually one big bracket that includes the shock mount, the spring perch mounts. So I'm going to cut those 4 brackets off this axle assembly, and we're going to weld them on this axle assembly. Now, this axle assembly is actually 55 inches from axle flange to axle flange. I should say housing flange to housing flange. From axle flange to axle flange, it's actually 60 inches. So it's 7/8 of an inch shorter than this axle flange, from axle to axle. Anyway, so we're going to be building this guy up and taking, again, these brackets off and welding them onto here. So as you notice, the cardboard under there, right? I've got marked where the axle tube is, where my spring mounts go, the outer axle flange. There's you can't see it, but I've got some marking there to where the housing flange is. So that way I can take the measurements and put these, brackets in the same location on this axle housing and weld them on. Now I have not bought them yet, but I'm going to buy a couple of brackets that will weld onto the top of the 9-inch. So I need to order those. I wasn't sure if this had a drain plug or not, or a fill plug, I should say, not a drain. So this has a fill plug. I'll probably, off to the side here, add a drain plug. So if I ever need to drain it, I can. I'm not going to add a big fill plug to this thing. It does come with, a vent. This is 3/16 inch tubing, which is really nice. Comes with the big Torino end bearings here, or rod ends, whatever. You can see I've got a Yukon aluminum center section and a billet, piece here for the pinion. Let's see if we can remove this. I want to show you the inside. If you notice in there, see how it is reinforced and welded for strengthen the axle housing. So Speedway, and this is a fabricated housing. This is not a stamped housing, but this is a fabricated housing, which gives it even more strength, which is going to be really nice, like I said. And then you can see they welded on the inside to give it even more strength. So this is a very structurally sound housing. Now the axles are 35 spline axles that we're going to be putting in, and these are cut to length. So in reality, I think I only need to cut like an inch or so off of these to get these to fit, because when I was looking up the description in the axle housing, it told me how long the axles needed to be, and these are PEM axles from Speedway as well. You can see they've got the bearings already all pressed on. You get the flange here with it, and you have 4.5, 4 3/4, and 5-inch selections for your wheel studs. So you have multiple options for wheel stud. So we're going to be going with 4 3/4 because it is a GM car. We'll stick with the GM pattern. I don't know. I bought these, back braces. I don't know if they're going to work with this housing. I purchased these originally. I was going to buy a factory housing and do it, but when I got a really good price on this one, I decided to go with this. And then over here we have a 350 ring and pinion, brand new, that will pop in here. Here is a billet yoke. Here is our 35 spline spool, and yes, I double checked. The spool works great with the axles, so no problem there. And we got an install kit. Now, the only thing I'm not showing you is I do have rear disc brakes for this. That will also be a Speedway rear disc brake kit that we will bolt on. And then to mount and hold all this up, we have trick chassis upper and lower control arms. So I got these from off Marketplace from a guy for a screaming deal. I think I paid 150 bucks for them. I think they're like $240 or something new. So nice powder coated lowers. You can see here we've got rear sway bar mount, and then we have adjustable uppers here. So we can, if we need to adjust our pinion angle. Here's our, spherical ends. And I shouldn't say not spherical ends, but anyway, the ends that will be going into the upper housing there, right, for these mounts. So anyway, that's the axle and what we're going to be doing. So with that said, now you see what all I've got, what I have, and where we're going. Let me go ahead now and strip this axle down so to make it lighter. That way I can, I'm going to knock the pinion out, ring and pinion out, pull the axles out, get all that stuff out of the way. So it's light. I can set it up here and cut it apart, and then we can, start cleaning this up and tacking these in place. All right, guys, so I got everything torn apart, and measuring from outer flange to outer flange, this is actually 55¼ inches. So the Ford 9-inch fabricated housing is 55 inches. So all I got to do is take these measurements that I have and basically knock off 1/8 inch on either side, right, of these measurements, and we can then tack these brackets into place that I need to still cut off. So that's awesome that, basically once I get these off, I can measure from the outside flange on the 9-inch, basically take these measurements, subtract 1/8 inch because the 9-inch is just a hair shorter, right? And then we can tack them in. But obviously before I tack weld them on, I'll get them off and we'll sandblast them and get them cleaned up. So that way they're nice and clean when we go to paint the housing. And so you can see here my measurements that I end up coming up with. So measuring from the outside of the axle flange, okay, to, the kind of the front corner, if you will, of this bumper, it's 4 3/8. And then measuring from, again, the outside of the axle flange all the way to the front spring mount here, that front corner is 8¼ inches. And then it's 2 inches from the axle flange to the shock mount. And so that's basically what I need to measure on both sides, when I go to tack it in, and then we'll just double check everything. So it's looking like we are going to be in good shape to weld this axle up. All right, guys, I didn't show y'all me making a mess with the plasma cutter here, but we've got, this one's cooled down. I've got a little cleaning up to do here on the back side. Same with this one. We need to do some cleaning up so we can, attach it. This one is hot. I started cleaning this one up with the plasma cutter, and we'll go through grinding wheels and stuff and clean it up more. And I still need to go through and clean this one up, remove this big chunk, obviously that big chunk here, so we'll get these cleaned up and remove some chunkage from here. So that way, we don't have as much grinding to do. Then I'll just kind of do a little fit up of them, or if they start fitting up good, then we'll sandblast them, so that we can kind of tack them in place. All right, guys, so I just wanted to show you before condition, right? You can see lots of crap, big old chunk of steel there, still from the rear axle. And honestly, in about 15 minutes, I was able to, just with the bandsaw here, clean this up, trim it all up, right? Then just use the wheel there, a little bit on the sides, and it cleaned it up real good. These are actually, these little radiuses are the factory radiuses. So once you kind of get this cut up and cleaned up, you know, it fits tight to, you know, the 9-inch. So let me go ahead and clean this one up, and then we'll do the same to the, you know, the shock mount. All right, guys, so I figured I'd show you, right? Here's the before. You know, you can see all the slag, everything I need to clean up and cut off, right? Here is the after. And if you notice, when I set it on here, okay, now granted, it's not in the right spot. But basically, we just got to do a little tweaking to it. You see it's nice and tight here. I need to tweak here a little bit to get end here so we can get this tube a little bit closer here. The gap's a little bit out. But if you notice, right, here is the original, you know, cut. Okay, basically here's the original cut. There was a little slag there, so I just need to do a little bit of adjusting to get this to be a little tighter fit to the tube here. And once we do that, then I think it's because of this. You know, if I make it, like I said, I got to do a little adjusting, get that to fit a little better on this side. And like I had mentioned earlier, you can see here, you know, this fits nice to the tube. So this is pretty much ready to weld in. Now, I need to clean this one up. We'll put them through the sandblaster. All right, guys, so we're back on the rear end after doing sick week, and we've got the tube in here. Now, this is a hollow tube. Yes, I don't have a solid tube. I also have 3D printed pieces to go inside the tube, so this can slip inside of it. So we'll at least get an idea, you know, if it bends a little bit. Hopefully, we'll get very minimal, if none at all, because I'm just welding these brackets on here, and that's it. You know, I'm going to try not to put a lot of heat in this. We're going to try to just do a little weld at a time. You know, do a little on this side, do a little on that side, and then, you know, we'll cool the welds down, and hopefully we get very little movement out of the axle, because as I mentioned earlier, right, this is all reinforced. This is a fab housing, not a stamped housing. You know, nice thick tubes. So hopefully we won't have too many problems. So I've got this is my angle, and you can see that she is straight up and down. And what we'll do is when we put these brackets on here, like so, you know, we will make sure that this is basically, you know, level as well. So this will be level to here, and then we'll start tacking these pieces in place. So anyway, let me figure out how I'm gonna clamp some of this up and get it tacked in. And then we'll come back and I'll kind of show you what we did. All right, guys, so we've got this bracket tacked on, a couple tacks here, tacks there, a couple tacks there. And the one thing I needed to make sure I did is because this axle housing is 1/4 of an inch shorter than the original one from outside flange to outside flange here, I need to subtract 1/8 of an inch from here to this measurement, because on the other axle, right, the other axle was out 1/8 of an inch more, so it was 4 3/8 from here to here. So I subtracted 1/4 of an inch, so it's 4 1/4 now from outside to this point. Now what we can do is we can measure for this piece, level it, tack this in place, all right, and do the same thing. I need to subtract about 1/8 of an inch, you know, to slide it over just a skosh, and then we can tack this piece in a couple spots. And then we'll go to the other side and tack it in a couple spots. Now, the one thing I made sure I did to this axle housing, I don't remember if I mentioned it, is I There was a lot of surface rust on it, so I cleaned it up real good, and then I wiped it down with some wax and grease remover or acetone, whatever you have, so that way you have a nice clean surface. You know, these are good clean surfaces, so you know, once we get this piece in, those two tacked in, then my plan is to, for example, is just weld across the top, let it cool down. Go over there, weld across the top, let it cool down. You know, and then come over here and weld in a back piece, and then go over there, weld in a back piece. You know, we'll just take my time and slowly weld this thing in and let it cool before we do any more welding. And then we'll check to make sure, right, the tube here, you know, can kind of slide in and out. So anyway, let me go ahead and tack this in. We'll show you the progress, tack those other in, and then we'll come back and see where we're at. All right, guys, so we've got all the brackets tacked into place. So now we'll just take our time and just weld a little bit here or a little bit there, because, you know, not only, right, am I going to weld the outside here, but we'll weld the inside too. You know, outside and inside, you know, top, inside. The same with here, right? So, you know, we're just going to take our time and weld just a little bit. And if I don't finish it today, I'll finish it tomorrow. Like I said, my goal is to have no warpage. We'll see if that actually happens or not. I'll grab the tube here in a second and just see if it slides in and out all right so far. And then, like I said, I'll just do just a little bit, let it cool down gradually. I'll go on to do something else, come back, do a little bit, let it cool down gradually, and, you know, just keep checking it. All right, guys, quick little update. So we've got the welds up here done and here done on both sides, as well as a couple welds on the back side on both these brackets. And it's hard to do it, but basically you can see, maybe you can't, but the tube is just, you know, spinning in here. If I slide it back and forth, it slides back and forth. So, you know, it's doing just fine at this point. You know, basically I quench it after I weld it with a little bit of water, and then I let it cool for a little bit, you know, before I do any other welding. And then while I'm waiting, you know, any little weld berries, you know, I'm just taking a file and cleaning up the weld berries. But so far so good. We've got a lot of welding yet to go on these brackets, and then I need to figure out these top things, you know, how to get those in. So that'll be next. All right, guys, so I've got the housing, as you can see, just kind of resting in here. I've got some blocks in here to keep it level. I've got the new lower control arms. You can see they're a tubular control arm. I put the original old ones in up top because if I were to put these new ones in there, because it's a Heim joint, you know, they flop all over the place. So I put the original in there to help me locate the upper you know, bushing mounts. Now this one sticks out a little bit more than that one. You know, if I need to, I'll cut it. You know, I can do a scribe line, kind of adjust it slightly back. It's kind of hard to do under the car. That one turned out much better. So what I think I'm going to do is I'll take a scribe mark, scribe it, you know, and then cut it back out, just slide it back a little bit. And that way it'll be a little more flush to this face like that one is. But, you know, what's nice is there's plenty of, now I don't have the spacers in here, but there's plenty of room in them. You know, they look like they're nice and centered, you know, to the bracket on both sides. When I had the other one in here, it was nice and centered as well. The original one, that is. It's nice and centered up in here. I've got this one just kind of held in place. So I think what I'm going to go ahead and do is take the housing back out now. And then, like I said, adjust that one. And I just need to finish welding these up here, right along in this area. But I just wanted to show you guys, you know, right, all that welding I've been doing so far, you know, works perfect. So these PLA, you know, 3D printed spacers in my tube, you know, because of this is a fabricated housing, is working awesome. There's no bend in it at this point. So I'm going to, like I said, just take my time finishing those up, and then I just need to weld these up. And then I'm going to put a drain in down here, and then I'm going to take a piece of round bar cut it down and weld around that so that way I can use that as a jacking point and not damage the drain plug down here, because the fill plug will just be through the differential itself. So anyway, guys, let me go ahead and rip this all back apart and we'll finish welding this whole thing up. I'll also double check my dimensions that I took off the other rear end and just make sure those are good as well. It was like 11 1/4 on the front and like 7 3/4 off the back, I think it was. We'll double check that to make sure. And then I think we'll have our housing all done. Then we can start putting axles in and start building the third member and whatnot. All right, guys, here's the template that I made. And if I set it up here, now granted, this isn't perfect how I'm doing it, but you'll notice, okay, it kind of lines up in the center here. And then if I come over here, it lines up in the center here. And if I measure my 11 1/4 and 7 3/4, it's pretty darn close. So we'll grab a tape, try to do this one-handed. And you can see about 11 1/4 right there. And then somewhere up here, I don't remember where I measured it, but it comes out to be about 7 3/4 right there. So I'm gonna say that's pretty darn close. So we're gonna go ahead and buzz these in and call it good. They look pretty symmetrical. Looks like this side might be obviously just a hair lower than this side because of the hump. All right, guys. So we've got the axle tube is slightly pulled in because when I weld the shock bracket here, this one here, the shock mount basically, it pulled it in a little bit. And so I'm using some MAP gas to heat her up and see if we can't get this tube to bend. And you can see the MAP gas is actually starting to make a difference here. We've got a lot of heat and whoops, yeah, killed the propane. So now we're gonna go, you can see I basically need to pull this axle this direction, right? This is the way we need to pull it back to get this puck to line back up. So we're gonna give her some more heat and then we're gonna quench it with some water and see if we can't get this sucker to fall back. So, and if this doesn't work, getting it nice and freaking hot with the MAP gas, because this is 3/16 wall tube, then we'll break out the TIG welder over there and we'll take some heat to it with the TIG welder and see if we can't get her to move. And if that doesn't work, we'll take the MIG welder and we'll MIG some stripes in this, full blast heat, and then have to just grind them down afterward. And hopefully that'll help pull this thing back. But you can see, you know, this thing is definitely getting some heat into it. So we're gonna heat it up just a little bit longer and throw some water on it and see if she'll start moving a little bit. So we may have to do this a couple times. Now the other side down there is fine. For some reason, I must not have quenched this one quick enough and welded maybe a little too long on it, generate a little too much heat. But that side there, the tube slides in and out between all three of the, you know, the pucks that I created. Now we'll check it once we get this side straightened out. But yeah, that's kind of where we're at. And I had to redo those because the axle was off center a little bit. So now those are all set and I can weld those in for good. And that's kind of the status. We're almost done. Basically, once we get the axle straight, then I'm going to put in the drain plug at the bottom and put the drain plug in at the bottom, and we'll do a jack thing. Can't think of what I want to call it. Jack post, I guess, to protect the drain, and then also a jack spot where we can lift the rear end, or the car, I should say. Anyway, let's throw some water on this and see what happens now. Now, this is a pretty hot area. All right, guys, so we're inching up on it. It's a little closer. I did actually flop the tube around from end to end just to make sure, you know, there wasn't a tube issue here. And I also flopped this end, that end and stuff to make sure. And it makes no difference if I try to take that end out, you know, the puck here, and put this tube in. It is still not aligned. So that end is aligned from these three this way. And so this one we're still working on. Now I got the TIG torch out and heated it up. And let me tell you, that got nice and cherry red compared to the MAP gas. So if you have a TIG torch, or TIG machine, right? This got nice and cherry red here, nice and cherry red there, quenched it with the water. And it did start to move the needle. So we're gonna go ahead, I'm just gonna let the axle cool down because it is still really hot, and let it just cool completely down. See how the gap close up, and then we'll do a little bit more and see if we can't get it just a little bit closer here. So we're getting closer. Now, if anybody is also wondering, maybe this tube got bent, right? Like I said, I swapped it end to end. We have the same condition. I had another exact tube, exact same length, exact same thickness, exact same everything. And we have the exact same condition. So just to rule out something else, you know, for you internet haters, that this doesn't work. Anyway, so we're gonna let it cool down, like I said, and heat it up some more, and then we'll get this puck in there to fit nice, hopefully here in a couple more tries. All right, guys, so I'd say that's pretty good. You know, so you can see here, right? She turns nice and free. You know, we got the two plugs in here. I know you're supposed to have them in the housing, but since this is a welded up housing and reinforced on the inside, I figure it was safe to run those there. And then you just got to spin this one in. You can see, guys, it just fits right in. So I had to do a little quenching on this side, just a little bit. I know earlier I said I didn't have to, but once I got that side kind of fixed, then it was like, oh, I need to do just this one was off about 1/8 of an inch, so it didn't take a whole lot of work to get this side done. And there we go. So now I'm going to put this in one last time because I want to make sure I have the axle set or the housing centered up in the middle of the frame, so that way when I put the wheels and tires on, right, everything should be centered up then also in the wheel tub. So we're going to put in everything one last time, bolt it up, and then see how this fits. And then I will weld these up for good. And then I'll put in the drain plug down here. And then there we go. For about $450, I have a 9-inch housing that's 3/6 tubing that is reinforced on the inside, you know, that I was able to make myself instead of spending $900 for a housing. I know you can get them for like $750, but I would have probably done a few more things to it to get upgrades. Like, that's an upgrade from Quick Performance. That's not standard. You know, that extra webbing there. So anyway, guys, let's let me throw it back in, make sure it lines up, and then weld that stuff up, weld that up, and then we can paint this sucker. All right, guys, so here is the All-Star Performance drain plug that I'm going to put in the rear end. So we're just going to kind of center it up here with the stud. There you go. So what I need to do, though, as you can see, I need to drill a hole big enough so that will sit flush, and then we can weld that in. And then I will take a piece from this, you know, cut it maybe 3/4 of an inch tall, something like that, and then clean it up and weld it on there. So we'll take a piece of this, you know, about 3/4 of an inch off of it, and then clean it up real good and weld it over top, so that way we can, you know, prevent this from getting hit and knock, whoops, tube was rolling. Prevent this from getting hit, you know, and have a jack pad so we don't damage the drain plug. So let me go ahead and, like I said, drill a hole, sit in there, we'll buzz it in, cut that up, buzz it in, and then we can paint the housing and stuff, which you guys won't probably care to see. All right, guys, so here is what we're working with. So we've got our piece of steel cleaned up, and I've actually got it slightly beveled, and I believe it goes, the bevel will be like this, so we have a nice tight fit on the sides, so we can weld it up. You can see we've got a hole here drilled out. I just need to clean that up a little bit. We'll weld this in first, then we'll weld this in, and then, you know, we'll have our drain plug done. Then I forgot about, I'm putting a disc brake kit in. I need to weld a couple of brackets, somewhere around here on the top side, so that way we can put, you know, the rubber brake lines in for the disc brake kit that I'll be installing. So I'll need to roughly figure that out, where to mount those up. And then I need to see about, right, this brake line is where the two of these will connect. Now I'll have to put a small steel line in between there, but you get the idea. And there, guys, is the finished product. So what I did first was welded in the bung, well, the drain plug, and then I welded in, you know, the jack pad, I'll call it, or kind of the protection of the drain plug. And so now we've got that done. Housing's still nice and hot, so we'll clean that up. And then I need to figure out, and I need to make 2 tabs, you know, on this side, so then I can just weld those on. And then we can prime. The axle should be done. I'll put the tube in one last time to make sure, you know, it spins nice and free. All right, guys, that wraps it up. So you can see we've got the brake tabs installed, the drains installed, all the brackets are welded up, and turns nice and free. So, you know, we've got a nice straight axle, you know, because we had to heat it and bend it a little bit. Everything is done. We're going to call it a wrap. I am going to use some epoxy primer and prime it, and then I'll top coat it with some paint. I'll probably just brush it on because it's winter time and I really don't want to spray in the garage. But I'm not going to show you that. That kind of wraps up what you guys wanted to see, is building an axle for my GM A body. So guys, I hope this helps you if you want to tackle your own project. You know, this is a Speedway axle that I purchased, you know, and then I bought the axles from Speedway as well, the cut to length axles. You know, that'll be other videos. The next video will probably be building the third member for it. And then once we get the third member built, you know, then we can put the, slide the axles and figure out the length we need to cut them to. And then, you know, we can put on the disc brake kit, install that, you know, on the car, most likely, because then it'll make it just too heavy. I'll probably, once the it's all painted, bolt it all in, the axle that is, and then I can assemble the third member, put it in, you know, bolt it down, and then we'll cut the axles in, kind of slide them in, and then, you know, we'll do the Speedway disc brake kit on it and install that. And that will wrap up the build series on the, you know, building the axle and kind of installing it and all that. I still need to get some shocks. I do not have any shocks for this thing. I do have new rear springs. And as you saw in the first part, I think, of the video, I showed you the new control arms that are going to go on this thing. I do need to get some different upper bushings because I didn't want to cut these down. You know, it uses, the kit came with these, which are very narrow. And if you kind of notice here, right, they're nowhere as near. Basically, I would have to cut a lot of this material off to get it to fit. The other problem is it's actually stepped inside of here. So it's higher here, and then they milled it a little bit. So it's, you know, narrower here, wider on the other side over here. So you can see this side is real sloppy. This side, it's real tight. So if I were to cut this down, basically it wouldn't work. So I'm going to get some press-in bushings to replace this. Anyway, That wraps it up, guys. Hope you made it to the end, and if you did, thank you very much. I appreciate it, because whatever I spend or whatever I earn from these videos goes right back into this heap. Anyway, we'll see you guys on the next video.